The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the flickering of an oil lamp that cast restless shadows on the stone walls. In the dimly lit chamber, a woman sat beside a sleeping man, her fingers gently tracing the long, uncut dreadlocks that had made him invincible. Outside, the Philistine warriors waited in hushed anticipation, their hands gripping swords, their breath shallow with expectation. Inside, Delilah, draped in flowing silk, watched with piercing eyes as a hidden barber crept forward, shears glinting in the candlelight. With each silent snip, strands of Samson's hair, his God-given strength, fell to the ground like forgotten relics of power. Samson, the mighty warrior, the slayer of thousands, the terror of Philistine armies, lay unaware. His greatest battle was not against an army but against the woman he loved. Tonight, strength would bow to deception, and by the time he awoke, it would be too late. And it came to pass in those days that the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, turning away from his commandments to follow after the gods of the nations around them. Because of their iniquity, the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines, who ruled over them with cruelty and oppression for 40 years. The Philistines were a mighty people, dwelling along the coast of the Great Sea, skilled in warfare and strong in number. They had iron chariots and warriors trained from youth. They raided the fields of Israel, plundering their harvests and carrying off their cattle. The people of Israel, weak and afraid, hid in caves and in the clefts of the mountains, crying out to the Lord for deliverance. But the Lord, in his mercy, did not forget his people. For though they had turned from him, he had compassion on them. And in those days there was a man named Manoah, of the tribe of Dan, who lived in the town of Zorah. He was a righteous man, yet his wife was barren and had borne no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman as she sat alone in the field, saying, Behold, thou art barren and hast borne no children, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware that thou drink no wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Hearing these words, the woman fell on her face in fear and awe. She perceived that the one who spoke was no ordinary man, but a messenger from the Most High. Trembling, she arose and ran to her husband, saying, A man of God came unto me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel, very terrible to behold. He spoke of a son who shall be born unto us, a child set apart for the Lord. But I did not ask his name, nor did he tell me whence he came. Then Manoah prayed unto the Lord, saying, O Lord, let the man of God whom thou didst send come again unto us, that he may teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born. And the Lord heard the prayer of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. She ran quickly and called her husband, saying, Behold, the man that appeared unto me has come again. Then Manoah arose and went to the angel, asking, Art thou the man who spoke unto my wife? And the angel said, I am. Then Manoah said, What shall be the rule of the child's life? What shall be his work? And the angel of the Lord said, Let the woman keep all that I have commanded her. She may eat nothing that cometh of the vine, nor drink wine, nor strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. For the child shall be holy unto the Lord from the womb. Then Manoah, perceiving this was a holy messenger, sought to offer hospitality, saying, Tarry with us, that we may prepare a young goat for thee. But the angel of the Lord said, Though thou preparest a meal, I will not eat of it. But if thou wilt offer a burnt offering, offer it unto the Lord. And Manoah, not yet realizing that this was an angel of the Lord, asked, What is thy name, that when thy words come to pass, we may honor thee? But the angel said, Why dost thou ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? Then Manoah took a young goat with a grain offering and placed it upon a rock unto the Lord. And as the flames rose up from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the fire of the sacrifice. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell on their faces in fear, And Manoah cried out, "We shall surely die, for we have seen God." But his wife with wisdom replied, "If the Lord had meant to slay us, he would not have accepted our offering nor shown us these things." And so they believed the word of the Lord and awaited the birth of their son. And in due time the woman bore a son and called his name Samson, which means like the sun, for he was to shine as a light in Israel's darkest days. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. The Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him in the camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. From his youth, Samson was set apart, never cutting his hair, for it was the sign of his covenant with the Lord. Samson grew mighty in strength, unlike any man before him. When he walked among the fields, the wind itself seemed to bow before him. The young men of Israel marveled at his might, and the elders whispered of the prophecy spoken before his birth. Yet in those days the Philistines remained strong, ruling over the people with an iron hand. The Israelites had no king, and they cried unto the Lord, waiting for the time when the mighty Samson would rise and begin their deliverance. And it came to pass, when Samson had grown into manhood, his strength became known throughout the land. The men of Israel marveled at his might, yet they did not understand the fullness of his calling. In those days Samson went down to Timnah, a city of the Philistines. There he beheld a woman, and his heart was drawn unto her. He returned to his father and mother, saying, "I have seen a woman in Timnah, of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as my wife." But his father and mother were grieved, saying, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all the people of Israel, that thou must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson insisted, "Get her for me, for she pleases me well." Now his parents did not know that this was of the Lord, for he sought an occasion against the Philistines. And as Samson journeyed to Timnah with his parents, they came upon the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came roaring against him. The beast's fangs were bared, its eyes aflame with fury. But the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon Samson, and with his bare hands he seized the lion and tore it apart as one would tear a young goat. Yet he told not his parents what he had done. Some days later, as he passed by that place again, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, a swarm of bees had made their home in the body of the beast, and there was honey within it. He took some honey in his hands and ate thereof. He also gave to his parents, but he told them not that he had taken it from the carcass of a lion. And Samson went down to Timnah for his wedding feast, for in those days it was custom for young men to hold a feast. The Philistines brought 30 young men to be with him, and Samson, seeing them, spoke a riddle, saying, "I will now put forth a riddle unto you. If you can answer it within 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot answer it, you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing." And the Philistines said, "Speak forth thy riddle." And Samson said, "Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness." For 3 days they could not answer the riddle. Then on the 4th day they went to Samson's wife, saying, "Entice thy husband, that he may tell us the answer, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have ye invited us to make us poor?" And Samson's wife wept before him, saying, "Thou dost but hate me. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the sons of my people, yet thou hast not told me the answer." And Samson said, "Behold, I have not told it even to my father or mother, should I tell it to thee." Yet she wept before him the full 7 days of the feast. And at last on the 7th day he told her, for her tears vexed his soul. Then she went quickly and told the riddle's meaning to the men of the city. On the 7th day, before the sun went down, the men of the city came to Samson and said, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" And Samson perceived that they had tricked him. He said unto them, "Had ye not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, And he went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 men, and took their garments to pay his debt. Yet in his wrath he left his wife and returned to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to another man, even to his companion who had been his friend. And it came to pass after a time that Samson returned to Timnah, bringing a young goat as a gift, for he desired to see his wife. But when he came to her father's house, her father would not let him enter. I thought thou didst utterly hate her, said the man, therefore I gave her to thy companion. But behold, is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her instead. At these words Samson burned with anger, and he said, Now shall I be blameless in my revenge against the Philistines. And he went out and caught 300 foxes, tying them tail to tail and fastening a torch between each pair. He lit the torches and set them loose in the Philistines' grain fields, vineyards, and olive groves. And behold, the fire spread, consuming the standing grain, the vineyards, and the olive trees. When the Philistines saw this, they said, Who hath done this thing? And it was told them, Samson, because his wife was given to another. Then the Philistines burned his wife and her father with fire. And Samson said, Since ye have done this, I will not cease until I have avenged myself upon you. And he smote them hip and thigh with great slaughter. Then he went and dwelt in the rock of Etam. Then the Philistines gathered an army and went up to Judah, saying, We have come to bind Samson, to do unto him as he hath done unto us. And the men of Judah, afraid, went to the rock of Etam and said to Samson, Knowest thou not that the Philistines rule over us? What hast thou done unto us? And Samson said, As they have done unto me, so have I done unto them. But the men of Judah said, We have come to bind thee and deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said, Swear unto me that you will not kill me yourselves. And they said, We will only bind thee and deliver thee, we will not slay thee. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. And when they came to Lehi, behold, the Philistines shouted against him. But the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes on his arms became as flax burned in fire, and his bonds melted from his hands. Then Samson found the jawbone of a donkey, and taking it in his hand, he slew 1,000 men. And Samson said, With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey have I slain 1,000 men. Then Samson, thirsty from battle, cried unto the Lord, O Lord, thou hast given this great deliverance by the hand of thy servant. Shall I now die of thirst? And God clave a hollow place in Lehi, and water came forth. Samson drank and was revived. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. And it came to pass in those days that Samson went down to Gaza, one of the strongholds of the Philistines. There he saw a harlot, and went in unto her. And when the Philistines heard that Samson was in Gaza, they said among themselves, Behold, Samson is come hither. Let us lie in wait for him all night by the city gate, and in the morning we shall kill him. But Samson arose at midnight, and perceiving their plot, he went to the city gate. And behold, with great strength he tore up the gates of the city, posts and all, and lifted them upon his shoulders. He carried them away to the top of a hill before Hebron, far from Gaza. And the Philistines marveled, for none among them could stand against his strength. And it came to pass after these things, that Samson loved a woman named Delilah, who dwelt in the valley of Sorek. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and eyes like the night. But her heart was not with Samson, nor with the Lord. The lords of the Philistines came to her, saying, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him. If thou do this thing, we will each give thee 1,100 pieces of silver. And Delilah, desiring wealth above all, agreed to their scheme. She went to Samson and said, Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mayest be bound to be afflicted. And Samson, knowing not the depth of her deceit, mocked her, saying, If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have never been dried, then shall I be weakened as any other man. Then the Philistine lords brought her 7 fresh bowstrings, and she bound him as he slept. And she called unto the Philistines, saying, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. But Samson broke the bowstrings as easily as flax touched by fire, and his strength was not known. And Delilah said unto him, Thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mayest be bound. And Samson, still jesting, said unto her, If they bind me fast with new ropes that have never been used, then shall I be weak and as another man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him as he slept. And she cried, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. But Samson broke the ropes from his arms like thread, and his strength remained. Then Delilah wept and said, Thou dost deceive me yet again. Tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mayest be bound. And Samson said, If thou weavest the 7 locks of my hair into the web of a loom, and fastenest it, then shall I be weak. And Delilah wove his hair into the loom and fastened it with a pin. Then she cried out, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. But Samson awoke, and tore away the loom, pin and all. Then Delilah said unto him, How canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. And she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him until his soul was vexed unto death. At last Samson, weary of her ceaseless pleading, told her all his heart, saying, There hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak like any other man. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent for the Philistine lords, saying, Come up this once, for he hath told me all his heart. Then she lulled Samson to sleep upon her knees. And she called a man to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and his strength departed from him. Then she cried out, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And Samson awoke, saying, I will go out as before and shake myself free. But he knew not that the Spirit of the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines seized him, and they gouged out his eyes. They bound him in fetters of brass and took him to Gaza, where he was made to grind grain in prison like an ox. And so the mighty Samson, once the terror of the Philistines, was brought low. And it came to pass that the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, saying, Our God hath delivered into our hands Samson our enemy, who slew many of us. And they called for Samson to be brought forth, that he might entertain them in his blindness and misery. And as he was led forth by a young boy, he said unto the lad, Suffer me to feel the pillars whereupon the house resteth, that I may lean upon them. Now the temple was full of men and women, and 3,000 Philistines stood upon the roof to watch Samson's humiliation. And it came to pass that the lords of the Philistines gathered themselves together in Gaza, to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice. The people shouted in the temple, saying, Our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. He that slew so many of us is now brought low. And the rulers and nobles of Philistia, their princes and mighty men, their warriors and their women, gathered in the house of Dagon. The temple was vast, and its roof was filled with thousands who came to witness the man who once terrorized their land. And as the wine flowed and their merriment grew, the people cried out, Bring forth Samson, that he may entertain us. Then they brought forth Samson, blind and weak, led by a young lad. The people mocked him, laughing and striking him as he passed. Some cast stones, others spat upon him, but he bore it in silence. And the lad that held Samson's hand guided him to the center of the temple, where the 2 great pillars stood that held up the house. And Samson, feeling the rough stone beneath his hands, said unto the lad, Suffer me to feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was filled with men and women, and upon the roof were about 3,000 Philistines looking down upon Samson in his disgrace. And in that moment Samson lifted his sightless eyes toward heaven, and called upon the Lord God of Israel, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, strengthen me, I beseech thee, only this once, that I may avenge myself upon the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson pressed his hands against the great pillars of the temple, and he cried aloud, Let me die with the Philistines. And with all his might he pushed, and behold, the pillars shook beneath his strength, and the walls trembled. A great rumbling filled the house as the foundation stones cracked and split apart. The people screamed in terror as the temple shuddered and fell, the roof crashing down upon the lords of the Philistines, their warriors and their nobles. And in that moment, the house of Dagon collapsed, crushing all within it. The mighty rulers of Philistia perished, and Samson died with them. And so it came to pass that in his death, Samson slew more Philistines than in all his life. And when the men of Israel heard what had befallen their enemy, they went down to Gaza and took the body of Samson from among the ruins. And they brought him up to his father's tomb in Zorah in the land of Dan, and they buried him there. Thus Samson, the judge of Israel, judged the people for 20 years, and though he fell, the Lord used him to begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines. For the strength of a man is not in his flesh, nor in his hair, but in the Lord his God. And the name of Samson was remembered among the people of Israel. His deeds were spoken of in the cities and villages, and his fall was a warning unto all who trusted in their own strength but turned away from the wisdom of the Lord. For though Samson was mighty in body, he was weak in spirit. He loved the women of strange lands, and he sought revenge more than he sought the will of the Lord. Yet in his final hour he turned his heart to God, and the Lord granted him one last victory. And so the story of Samson was told from generation to generation, a tale of strength and weakness, of betrayal and redemption, of judgment and mercy. For the Lord, in his wisdom, raises up whom he will and brings low whom he will, and his ways are beyond the wisdom of men. For the Lord is my strength and my song, and he is become my salvation. Exodus 15:2. Thus ended the life of Samson, the mighty judge of Israel. And it came to pass that after the death of Samson, the people of Israel mourned him. For though he was a man of great flaws, he was also a man chosen by God. For 20 years, Samson had been a judge over Israel. His strength was unmatched, and his name was feared among the Philistines. Yet in the end, his greatest enemy was not the Philistines, but his own weaknesses, his desire for strange women, his unbridled anger, and his lack of spiritual discipline. Though Samson was set apart as a Nazirite, a man consecrated unto the Lord, he did not fully walk in the ways of righteousness. His strength was a gift from God, yet he squandered it on personal vendettas and carnal desires. And so it is written, The Lord killeth and maketh alive, he bringeth down to the grave and lifteth up. The Lord maketh poor and maketh rich, he bringeth low and lifteth up. 1 Samuel 2:6-7. For the Lord had raised up Samson to begin the deliverance of Israel, but his downfall was of his own making. And let all who hear the tale of Samson and Delilah remember the danger of trusting in one's own strength rather than in the Lord. For Delilah, though beautiful, was a deceiver, a woman who sought wealth over love, betrayal over loyalty. She was not the first to tempt Samson, for before her there was the woman of Timnah, whom he sought against his parents' wishes, and the harlot of Gaza, whom he took for pleasure. But Delilah was the one who brought him to ruin, for it is written, The lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Proverbs 5:3-4. Delilah, like many before her, was an instrument of the enemy. She did not love Samson, yet she enticed him with her words, pressing him daily until his soul was vexed unto death. And so Samson gave away his secret, not knowing that in doing so, he was giving away his very life. Let all who hear take heed. Beware of those who seek to manipulate through flattery and deception. Do not put trust in those who have proven unfaithful. And above all, guard thy heart, lest it be led astray. For Samson fell not by the sword, but by his own desires. And what is strength without wisdom? Samson, though mightier than 1,000 men, lacked discipline. Though he could slay his enemies with the jawbone of a donkey, he could not tame his own desires. For the Lord had given him power, but Samson did not seek the Lord's counsel. Wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. Ecclesiastes 9:16. If Samson had walked in the way of the Lord, if he had humbled himself and sought after righteousness, his end would not have been in chains and blindness. And yet, even in his weakness, God's purpose was fulfilled. For in his death, Samson destroyed more Philistines than in his life, proving that even the fallen may be used by God. And in his final hour, Samson turned his heart back to God. Blind and bound in Gaza, he had time to reflect. The man who once ruled by his might was brought low, humiliated before his enemies. Yet as he grinded grain like a beast, something else began to grow, his hair and his faith. For the Lord had not forsaken him. And in his last breath, Samson prayed, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I beseech thee, only this once. And God heard his prayer. For though Samson had sinned, though he had squandered his calling, though he had fallen into the hands of his enemies, he was still chosen by God. And so, with one final act of faith, he brought down the house of Dagon, destroying the Philistine lords and breaking their dominion over Israel. His death was his atonement, his final act of obedience to God's plan. For it is written, A righteous man falleth 7 times and riseth up again. Proverbs 4:16. And though Samson fell in the end, he rose up again, not by his own strength, but by the strength of the Lord. And so, Samson was buried in the land of Dan, in the tomb of his father Manoah. His name was remembered in Israel's history, for though he failed, he fulfilled his purpose. And what shall we say of Samson? Was he a hero or a fool, a warrior or a slave to his own weaknesses? The answer is both, for Samson's life was a warning and a lesson. Strength without wisdom is dangerous. A man's greatest enemy is his own desires. God's purpose will be fulfilled, even through flawed vessels. And in the end, Samson's story was not one of defeat, but of redemption. For though he stumbled, though he fell into temptation, though he lost everything, in his last moment he turned his heart back to God, and the Lord heard him. And thus, the name of Samson, the mighty judge of Israel, was written in the book of Judges, his deeds remembered throughout generations. The strength of God. And what is the strength of a man compared to the strength of God? For even the strongest will one day fall, but the Lord endures forever. Some trust in chariots, and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. Psalm 27. And though Samson trusted in his own might in the end, he turned back to the Lord, and that was his true victory. For the Lord does not choose the strongest or the wisest, but those willing to be used by him. And so let all who hear take heed. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Proverbs 9:10. May the tale of Samson and Delilah be a lesson to all, to walk in wisdom and not be led astray by temptation, to seek God rather than trust in one's own strength, and to know that even in failure, God's grace is greater than man's weakness. For the true strength of a man is not in his body but in his faith. And thus ends the story of Samson, the judge of Israel. The temple trembled. Philistine laughter turned to screams as the great pillars cracked beneath Samson's grasp. Dust rained down like judgment from the heavens. The lords of Philistia, who once mocked the fallen warrior, now saw terror in his blind, unyielding eyes. With one final cry, Samson called upon the God who had never truly left him. Let me die with the Philistines. The earth shook. The walls collapsed. The house of Dagon, the The god of Samson's enemies crumbled into ruin, and as the dust settled, silence swallowed the cries of thousands. In death, Samson claimed his greatest victory, not by the might of his arms, but by the hand of the Almighty. His story was not one of defeat. It was a warning, a lesson, a legend. For though he was the strongest of men, his greatest weakness was not his enemies. It was himself. If you enjoyed this epic retelling of Samson and Delilah, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are more powerful biblical stories, dramatic retellings, and cinematic storytelling coming your way. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Let's grow this community together. Your support helps bring these timeless stories to life. Subscribe now and be part of the journey.